looking at addiction in this way opens several doors for us. Doors that may have been closed to us because we hadn't looked or we hadn't paid attention. But they must be opened because there's so much more we are required to learn before we can improve what we're trying to do for our patients. It isn't that we don't try hard. I don't think we acquired enough relevant tools to address certain relevant areas of the addict's behavior, if that is indeed what we're trying to change. So this is the way that I approach addiction. When I say it's self-induced, I mean simply that the person is using this altered state as a tool, as a skill, to enter an altered state of consciousness, and in that state to somehow make it better than he can make it in the real world. And so we say he's living in a fantasy world. Well, the choice is clear, wouldn't you? Given the circumstances in the real world. Let's move on. The predisposing factors that I made mention of, certainly there are more than two, but we'll start with two, because I think that they are very prevalent, again, as common across many forms of addictive behavior. One looks at the biology, which includes the givens genetically, givens during the course of the 9 months of development before we're even born. And there are many influences of physiological and neurochemical nature, even while we're in the womb, that kind of set us up. The title of our conference, again, is to lay the cards on the table. Well, let's look at all the cards, and then see how we want to move them about to get a better hand. We can make a better bet on it and make a better outcome of it. So the first is physiological. And what I've found in listening to addicts, and addicts taught me everything I really know. I went through many, many years of education to learn what to do. And then they said, that's very interesting, doctor, but I've been treating myself a long time, and if you listen, I'll tell you something about what addiction really means. Because I've lived it, I've been there, I've done that. And all of a sudden, what I learned in the books wasn't nearly enough, and some of it wasn't even on target. And so I listened more. And that's where I spent most of my 40 years, listening to addicts, because they were excellent teachers. And now I share what I know with addicts. And they look at me, and sometimes they weep, and they say, well, how did you know? And the answer, of course, is you told me. Not you, but people like that. And when that happens, it's happened already today, it validates for me what I've been trying to discover. It strengthens my conviction, it adds to my database, and it encourages me to continue. And I'll share that with you. This abnormal resting arousal level. Now we all have an arousal level. It's there. But if we think of a bell-shaped curve, the so-called normal curve, most of us are in that middle area. That's where most people are. That's why it's normal. But on the far ends of a bell-shaped curve, there are the extreme folk. And in health-related terms, extremes equals abnormal. It's not normal, so it's abnormal. It's different than normal. And addicts are different than normal in that regard. Again, different in degree, not in kind. And the degree to which they're different is this abnormal arousal state, the resting arousal state. And I underscore it's a resting arousal state. All our arousal states change. Sometimes, I can get away from that, huh? Sometimes we feel down. I mean, our energies are depleted. We feel kind of blah. And so we find something that's real exciting, something that's stimulating. And we adjust our own arousal level all the time that way. And sometimes we're all tense, you know. And we just have to get down. And we speak in those terms. And then we find something that, quote, relaxes us. And we come down. And we move back and forth within the middle range of this normal curve. How many of you have ever heard of the game or even played it that has a little packet, a little plastic packet with 3 BBs in it, 3 little metal rolling things, and 3 little holes. And the object of the game is to put the BBs in the holes. Ever played that game? Huh? Well, it takes a little while, but most of us can get the BBs in the holes hot. And that's the way we arouse, how we deal with our arousal state. We know how to move it around until we get all the BBs in the holes, and when they're safely in their holes, we have a multi-syllable answer for that. They're not just in their holes. This is called homeostasis. And we seek a term, a state of homeostasis, where all the BBs are in the holes, and we feel just, yeah. Addicts play exactly the same game. I told you that. Except they don't have any holes. And the BBs go from one side to the other, and then back again. And the addicts tell us that. And they're titrating themselves. They're marvelous chemists. And they find the chemicals that do that. You get them up and get them down, and too far down, they know where to get up, and you get too far up, they know how to get down. And they tell you that. And they're very erratic. They're very extreme in the arousal levels they'll report to you. Sometimes I'm down all the time. I just even say I got the blahs so bad that I feel dead inside. And that is called, again, they're hypotensive. They are hypotensive. They're at this far end where their tension level is below normal, if you please. And that's biological. That's given. That's part of their constitutional makeup. That's it. And others are at the other end. They're not hypotensive. They are hypertensive. Tense, way up, like a bowstring. And they report that. And nature plays some rather dirty tricks on these addicts. Nature fixes them in such a way, the hypotensive and the hypertensive, fixes them in such a way that incoming stimuli are modified to make their condition worse. The hypotensive person, for instance, let's take auditory stimulus for an example. We all hear that stimulus. The person who is hypotensive doesn't hear that. He hears that. It's muted. It's diminished. All incoming stimuli. And addicts will tell you, I don't have any feelings. I just feel dead inside. And that affects them in an interpersonal way because they can't relate. It's very difficult because all of their feelings are just kind of deadened. This same sound that I told you about, when it's heard by a hypertensive person, is not this, it's that. And all incoming stimuli are accelerated, are enhanced, are magnified. Can you imagine living like that? That's pretty tough, to drag around that kind of biological equipment. Now, the addict doesn't know what to do about it, the potential addict, the person who has this kind of arousal. They don't know what to do about it. They just walk around with a great big, they're dead inside, they're blahs, they're bored out of their skulls, or they're just so tense they vibrate. Until something happens. Until quite by chance, they run across something in the environment that makes them feel better. That suddenly they're less tense. Suddenly they feel alive, wonderfully alive when they do this thing. Gamblers report this all the time. When I gamble, I feel alive. They look for things that are stimulating. Not all. There are those who are so tense, they sit with machines, for instance. And as they play, they just come down. And the world gets turned off. All of the incoming stimuli, from inside, from the past, from the present, everything. And that feels so good. Of course it feels good. If it didn't feel good, they wouldn't do it. They're not doing it to hurt themselves. Addicts are not masochists. You know what a masochist is? You know, hitting yourself over the head with a hammer because it feels good when you stop. No, they're not that way. They're not punishing themselves. They're doing the best they can with what they got, with what they're given. And the choices they make sense to the addict. And to his biology, if you please. Let's look beyond biology to the second predisposing factor. The first is the biological, the second is the psychosocial, the world in which he lives. And we're looking at it mainly as a child. When addicts come into our clinics or our consulting rooms, usually our first question is, when did it start? When did you start doing what you're doing? And how did it get worse? And what involved this and that and the other thing? And we begin the history of the client with the history of his addictive behavior. I mean, this is a 40-year-old client. And all of a sudden we're saying, okay, 40-year-old, you began 10 years ago doing your thing. And we're missing what happened in the preceding 40 years. What set him up? That now he uses this method to find relief, to find satisfaction in his life, his fantasy life, his addictive life, more than he can find in the real world. Again, my training is such that when I see something, my first question is, how come? I mean, what caused that? And it's like peeling an onion, and you peel back the first set of leaves, and you say, aha, look at that. But how come those leaves are that way? What caused that? And then you peel another set of leaves, and you say, oh my, that's interesting. That underlies the first set of leaves, but how come those lower leaves are like that? How come? And the simple how come question that I asked addicts, and these are identified middle-aged addicts, when you were a kid, long before your addictive behavior began, how do you feel about yourself? Did you have a happy childhood? What do you think the answer is? In 90% of those addicts, 95%. They say, no, I was a very unhappy kid. This is class. We're talking about 8, 10, 9 years of age. Unhappy. Kind of depressed. Well, when you were at home, how were things at home? Not so good. Well, what do you mean not so good? Well, sometimes I got hurt there. I mean, bad things happen to me. And sometimes when I really needed something so bad, it didn't happen. I didn't get the recognition, the attention, the support, the love that I needed so much at the time. They were too busy. Or they weren't there. They left, they died, they ran away, they got divorced. What about this place where you were? I mean, it was so bad. Why didn't you leave? And the kid smiled. This is the 30-year-old kid, or 40-year-old kid saying, when I was 12, 9, 8, 6, what do you mean leave? Where would I go? What resources would I have to flee? And those are the usual alternatives when you're under a great deal of stress, right? You have a little formula. You either flee or you fight the situation you're in. Well, if you couldn't run away, why didn't you fight? Fight who? Those giants? Those giants that I call parents, those adults around me? They were all powerful. They had everything. They did everything. Good and bad. I couldn't fight them. But what did you do? I kind of made things up in my head. What does that mean? Well, when things weren't right, I kind of made up the way I'd like them to be. And pretty soon, if we had to put a label on it, he was fantasizing. He was building a fantasy world in which he felt more comfortable. Anybody ever do that? Anybody ever come home from work or at work, sit there thinking of all the things you're going to do to that boss? All the things you're going to do to that lovely lady who's waiting for you after work? Or the fine, handsome gentleman out there? We live those lives all the time. We're not just where we are. We're all over the map. And our fantasies take us anywhere and everywhere. It's the best ride you can find. And it's cheap. And it's called dissociation. And we'll talk about dissociation as the absolutely essential grease that carries us into these altered states. I talk about the childhood and early adolescence where the kids report when they were kids. They felt inadequate. They felt inferior. They had this draggy kind of blue, depressed sort of mood as kids. And they felt a sense of rejection by not only their parents, but other adults and important people in their lives. They were one down, and that's the way they reported themselves. Before they ever got to be 14, 16, 17 years of age and ran into this thing, whatever it was, a substance or activity that got the response, oh, wow, where's this been all my life? They didn't have it before that. They just walked around with a great big, an emptiness. Another big word. They were deprived. They weren't frustrated. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what to fix them. That would be frustrated, not being able to reach a known goal. They didn't have a known goal. They were just, And then something happened. Something wonderful happened as far as they were concerned. Something that made them feel better physiologically and better psychologically about themselves. That's quite a happening. I mean, that's an epiphany. If you ever had an epiphany, there it is. If those are the primary predisposing factors. And I find, by the way, these factors in every addict I've ever worked with. Not that I kept digging until I said, I finally found it. No, I take them out pretty easy. I said, if that's so, how does the addiction begin? And here's this kid who's in big trouble. He's not a happy kid. Maybe he's beat up physically, emotionally. The adverse situations, and we have a whole list. I have to find about 8 typical adverse childhood experiences. A-C-E. A-C-E. Adverse childhood experiences. What can those be? Anything in the world? No. They tend to collapse into about 8 categories. There's the usual, that's the word I want, deliberate, abusive behaviors of adults, where the child is physically abused, or emotionally abused, or sexually abused. Those are in the literature. That's abuse. That's what we're talking about. Early childhood aversive experiences must be those kinds of abuse. It's not just those. It is those. But it's also living in a home with a parent who is an addict, an alcoholic, a gambler, a drug addict, a workaholic. What makes it so tough to live with such a person? The point is, quite literally, that person's not living with you. They're living their own lives. They're focused on their own needs. They don't have time or energy or concern with others. That's the way addicts are. They become very much, big word, egocentric, revolving around themselves and their own needs, which leaves very little trickle down for the rest of the family. And if you're one of the rest of the family, you don't get much of that. What's more, some of those people become rather erratic and might strike out at you or say bad things to you or approach you in ways to satisfy their own sexual needs. So it's not just one thing, it's always a combination of things. Or this child who's being set up to become an addict. What happens? You're walking around this way, pretty bad, feeling awful, and all of a sudden, something absolutely marvelous happens. And it is absolutely marvelous. It's a chance, stress-reducing, situational event which leads to this discovery, a change, a positive change from this aversive resting state that he's been dragging around physiologically, psychosocially, maybe beat up with one kind of aversive condition or another. And there are other aversive conditions. One of the parents gone, divorce, death, incarcerated someplace. And there's another very, very important factor in the lives of addicts I've talked to, looking back on their childhood. One of the most aversive things that affected them was the father beating up on the mother, a battered mother, or vice versa, but violence in the home. Can you imagine how terrifying that is to a child, to see these giants at war, hurting each other? The first thing the child figures is, I don't want to lose my mother, need my mother, I don't hit my mother. And the next thing is, if he's hitting the mother, who might be next? A terrible fear. If that's what's going on, it's going to maybe get to me. Or if they see somebody beating up an older sibling, or whatever the case may be. Violence in the home is a tremendous aversive childhood experience. I may have missed one or two, but those are the things to look for when you talk to addicts and you say, how was it when you were growing up? You remember? As a kid now. Remember that? And get the story. If you just open the door, did this ever happen? Don't just say, what are the bad things that happened to you? That's too broad a question. Be a little more specific along the lines we've just discussed. And you'll get more specific answers. If not right away, pretty soon. When you put your addicts in groups, and you talk about this, and one addict will say, yeah, this or that happened to me. And pretty soon the other heads in the group will begin to nod, and maybe some tears will fall. And it opens up the door. They have now permission to talk about it, because somebody broke the silence. And the silence was an admonition. What was the admonition in the home where these things are going on? Very simple. You don't talk about what happens in our house outside our house. What happens in the house stays in the house. And there's a corollary sometimes. If you talk, I'll kill you. And children go around with these admonitions ringing in their ears. I've tried to get information from kids in residential treatment programs, mainly for drug and alcohol kids. And I do have some data I'll share with you on that. These are kids that are incarcerated for the next 3 to 6 months in the treatment program. Kids average age 14, anywhere from 12 to 18. And we go in there and we ask these same questions, and the kids are pretty mum. They're pretty mum. A few will kind of let you know, but most of them are pretty mum. Why? Where are they going to go at the end of the 3 months or the 6 months? Where are they going to go? Back home is where they're going to go. And if they talk, somebody from the social agency in the State's going to come and take their parent off someplace as an abusive parent, or have them incarcerated in a mental hospital, or whatever the case may be. And they've lost again. So they stay mum. And they don't talk much. By the time they're adults, it's amazing the thoroughness, the completeness, the clearness of their memories about what happened 40, 50 years ago. And the details I remember about certain kinds of abuse. Again, I'll share the data with you. Whatever I say, I try to have backup with data, mine or somebody else's. Otherwise, I feel very uncomfortable. And when I am, I'll let you know that I don't have much data here. I have a little, and more is needed. And hopefully you or someone you know will go out and check it out and get such data. The first stage of the onset of any addictive behavior is this stage of discovery. And it's the same whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or running or sex or food, anything. The first is the old wow reaction. The sudden change from this terrible internal state to a change, to a positive change. And then there's a rebound. It doesn't last forever. And then pretty soon they're back to where they were. But now they're wiser. They're no longer deprived. Now they've been there. Now they've been there. And they say, what? They're not stupid. They say, I want to go back. I want more of that good stuff. And so there are deliberate attempts to reestablish this positive experience. Quite by chance, confronted them. And that's what I mean when I say addictions are acquired over time. They don't happen like that. Because they make them better. Better and better. Better and better. Looking for something that's just terrific in terms of pleasure and tension relief and wish-fulfilling fantasies. Because when I'm there, all my wishes are fulfilled. It's my world. Anything is mine. Everything is mine. Everything is for me. Now, it's a bumpy path, being an addict. I mean, bad things happen. There are times of discomfort and apprehension and panic. Maybe the police are going to arrest you for doing what you're doing. Maybe you'll be caught and somebody will take it away, so you can't do it anymore. There are those times and concerns. But if you keep building it, it gets better and better and better. And pretty soon, there's what we call, retrospectively, the peak experience. The peak experience. And they know it. This is, wow, this is the best yet. And they worked hard to get there. And they know how they got there. And they keep trying, after the peak experience, to get back there again, and back there again, and back there again. And sometimes if they're using drugs and so on, trying so hard to get back to the peak experience leads to overdose. Sometimes very fatal overdose. And in gambling we say, well, they're not overdosing. That's the word for overdosing in gambling. Something very close. We say they're chasing. They're chasing. There's a whole book. Henry LeSueur wrote a wonderful book on chasing. Chasing their losses. Why? They're concerned about money. Are compulsive gamblers concerned about money? Is it all about money? You think so. You read the literature, the common literature, you'd be told so. But again, it's wrong. That's not the case. It's all wrong. That simply isn't so. Gambling, pathological gambling, compulsive gambling, is not about money. Now, you ask the gambler, well, I gamble because I want to win. I want lots of money. Well, what would you do with it? I say, I gambled. Well, would you buy a new car? No. Would you give it to your wife? Well, not all of it. I mean, would you buy toys or something? Well, a little bit. But what's the main thing you do with money? I gamble with it. I mean, what's money for? But to enter and prolong this wonderful feeling, that altered state I talked about. That's what the money's about. To keep me there longer. That's what I'm chasing for. To get the lost money so I can pump it back in so I can be gambling. Because when I'm at gambling, I feel better than anything. when I'm at drinking, when I'm at drugging, when I'm at sexing, when I'm at fooding, I feel better than anything. And that's what the money's for. It's the fuel that runs the vehicle. Oh, the vehicle. There's an interesting thing. Gambling is used by anybody, but particularly by the gambling addict, is a vehicle. It carries a vehicle. It carries you someplace, right? Now, the gas for the vehicle is the delusional state. Not delusional, but dissociated state, excuse me. It's a dissociated state that keeps it going. So the individual is looking for ways to keep this thing going, but all the time it's getting worse and worse. The tragedy of addictive forms of behavior is that they don't last. They simply don't last. Now some will go on 20 years, 30 years, but most of them don't last. They follow this course that I've laid out. The second stage is resistance to change. And that's exactly what it is for the addict. Remember, people see him doing these things. People are aware, and they say you're doing too much of it, and you should cut down. And the addict says, oh, I can stop anytime I want to, end quote. That's just universal. It's a universal response. Or they have very fast dancing around it. Well, I do this and I do that. And what they're really doing is resisting changing this behavior which is so satisfying to them. Wouldn't you? If you found something like that. Except after a while, this stage runs out of steam. This attempt to establish that old positive experience. And it gets worse and worse, and it's not happening, and they chase, and they overdose, and they do all of these things. And pretty soon, they're approaching the stage where you find them in your consulting room. You don't find them here. No way. Unfortunately, you don't know what's happening here, so they're not there either. They come to you at the end of the third stage, the stage of exhaustion. Exhaustion of all these attempts. Exhaustion of their own attempts to maintain this fantasy world that at one time was so great and now no longer is working. And by the time they reach this stage, and notice the course here, notice this dramatic arrow downward. By that time, they've had it. By that time, they may be in jail. They may be in a mental hospital. They may be being treated for some serious physical problems. They may be ready to jump off a building. Maybe they've already jumped. Suicide shows very high rates among addicts, particularly gamblers. Remember I told you what addicts are looking for? Escape. What is the ultimate escape from an aversive reality? The ultimate escape. Same game, same procedure, same method, except suicide. That's the ultimate escape. Then you're really gone. You're really relieved. You're really away from that reality. And addicts have greater needs to get away because they don't have the skills. They haven't acquired the ways of coping with the world so that it can be reasonably satisfying for them. When I treat addicts, they all come in, and say, well, when I get through with this, doc, you help me with this, and then it'll be better for me. What's better? Well, I won't have the consequences and so on and so forth, and my family will love me, I won't be under threat of arrest, etc., etc. But I have to tell you something. Once you stop doing, once I've helped you do things other than what you're doing, which is the best I can offer, it won't be better. It won't be better. I said, what are you talking about? Why do you think I'm here? I said, it won't be better than it was. What do you mean? And so I did a little research. And I said to the addicts, various kinds, alcoholics, gamblers, whatever, when you were doing it, when you had this experience, And that was the peak experience. Give that a score of 100, okay? That was 100. That was the best as it gets. Now that you've stopped doing it, now that you're doing less of it and so on, what score would you give to the thing that is most satisfying in your life? Whatever it is, what score would you give? Oh, one or two said, 150. I got my family back. 125. You know, I'm not crazy anymore. You know what the average score was? 70. Not 100. Nothing approaching 100. Nothing approaching the way it was in that fantasy life. The real world only gave him 70. And that's what I tell my clients. If we go ahead with this and things work out, it won't be better. But on the other hand, it won't be as bad either. And that's the contract. Let's go on. Unfortunately, this is where you're getting your clients. If you were a betting person, what would you bet on the odds of your success? I mean, this is where you pick them up at the end. You got all the cards on the table, right? That's the name of this conference. How much money would you bet on your own success if this kind of patient was just falling off the cliff? That's what we have. We get the worst of the worst. They're the only ones who come to us. They're not coming at this time or this time. Unless somehow we get the word out, unless we somehow increase awareness, unless we somehow increase our outreach efforts so we get them earlier. Not in here, that won't work. But here, very early on, when they first experience it, as kids, during adolescence. How do we know when the kid's at risk? Remember the 5 dissociative reactions I told you about? And they're listed in that material you have on the Jacobs neglect and abuse protocol. When kids say, you know, when I do it, I feel like a different person. These are kids. You know, when I do it, I feel like things are kind of like in a dream, in a trance. When I watch myself doing it. And they kick down those kinds of dissociative reactions while doing it. Those are the red flags of saying, when I do it, I escape from the real world. And that's where you can catch them very early on, if you can make them aware of what's happening. But that's the best way. Otherwise, it's invisible. And gambling is the most invisible form of early addiction you're going to find. There are no track marks. People don't smell their breath. Their eyes aren't hazy on them. They don't wobble when they walk. And yet the gambling can be the most devastating of all these addictive behaviors in terms of its impact on others and even the general environment and the community. And how much can you drink or how much can you drug? With gambling, there's absolutely no limit to how much money you can steal and acquire and finagle to gamble. It's usually somebody else's money. And you steal it, you prostitute your body, and you do anything you can to keep feeding it. Because when you're gambling, you're in that moment. Or drinking, or drugging, or whatever the case may be. Let's move on. The central role of dissociation. I've talked about that several times. You can't enter, the door's barred. You can't enter this altered state of consciousness that I've been talking about down there, that you're trying to get to once you've escaped reality. You can't get into that altered state unless you dissociate. Unless you dissociate. So you're a new addict. You say, okay, teach me how to dissociate. I want to get there. And you say, oh, I can teach you. You already know. What do you mean I already know? It's built in, my friend. Nature gave you a gift. Anybody, everybody can dissociate at our earliest stages of development as infants. It's a given. It's part of our structure. When children, little children, who have very few resources, fight, flee, or somehow manipulate, adjust to what's happening to them, or needful to something else to be present in their environment, they don't have a way of just doing it in the real world. They don't have the resources. They don't have the strength. They don't have the persuasive powers. They're just, ugh. And if things are terrible in that world, either by virtue of what's happening or by virtue of what's not happening, by virtue of what they're deprived of or feel deprived, they escape in their heads. They dissociate. And it happens naturally. It just happens. When things just happen, and it feels so good after they happen, does that make an impression on you? Do you think it might? Well, if things are really tough and then all of a sudden it was better? Do you think you remember that? Do you think you try to figure out how that happened and what you can do this time, instead of just having it happen, to make it happen? And that's the course of learning how to dissociate. And we do learn. It's a skill. It's like riding a bicycle. And over time, those of us who use it and need it more do it better. And the addict is an expert at dissociation. Has to be. What's my evidence for this? Am I just blowing steam? No, I don't think so. All addictions have a three-part attribute set. Whether you're talking about gambling or alcohol or drugs, whatever, to be successful, remember, an addicted career is a course of action which attempts to provide a better life for the addict, even in the short term, a better life. So whatever it is that he's doing, or she, has to provide these kinds of things. First, it has to blur reality testing. That's the reality that is so aversive out there, so impossible to deal with, so non-giving. Secondly, it has to reduce the self-criticalness and dysphoric mood. It's the first time I mentioned self-criticalness. Mentioned dysphoric mood. And I gave you another secret, by the way. If you read the literature, you'll find, there's big controversy. When does depression begin in addicts? And many say, why? When they give it up. They've lost the best friend they ever had, which is true. And that's why they're depressed. Well, that's a good reason for depression, but that's not where it starts. Where did depression start? What did little kids say before they ever were addicts? They were depressed then. And again, my question is, how come? How come they felt that way about themselves? Inferior, shame, inadequate, rejected. How come? So I dug a little deeper. And the second handout that you have, I think it's titled Jacobs, Neglect, Abandonment, and Abuse Protocol. It's heavy. Oh, yeah, it's heavy. It's really one of the most systematic views or attempts to assess in detail certain kinds, very frequent kinds, of early childhood. And we'll talk about that tomorrow afternoon. Just know that more's coming. We need to have detailed information about what happens to these kids if we're going to do something about it. Self-criticalness. Of all the things that happen to kids, and I noted some of them, and I noted the abuses, the physical and the sexual, and that's what fills the literature, physical and sexual abuse of children. But there's another kind of abuse that gets short shrift. doesn't get nearly the attention. And it's called emotional abuse or psychological abuse. What does that mean? What does that mean? Give it life. Give it words. What's emotional abuse? Emotional abuse is when the kid hears again and again, "Can't you do whatever right? Can't you be like your sister? I wish you were never born." They're stupid. Those words wound, cut deeper than any kind of physical abuse, any kind of sexual abuse, and are more sustaining. When we do studies using this tool, and I'll report some of the data, the kind of abuse that is reported as most frequently among all of these addicts, whether they're gamblers or substance abusers or whatever, the most frequent form of abuse that they report as children is emotional abuse. I'm not talking about 10, 50, 20%. I'm talking about 50, 60, 70%. More than other forms of abuse, emotional abuse. And what do you think makes the kids self-critical? Somebody telling them, "Can't you ever do anything right? Can't you be like somebody else? I wish you were dead." Those are the tapes in the heads of the addict. You want to sit down and encourage rapid rapport with your client. Don't tell him all the things his addiction did to hurt him, how he lost this and lost that. Get off that. Get on to what the addiction is doing for him, not what it's doing to him. He's doing it for a reason. All behaviors have a positive intention. What's his reason for doing that? That he's committed so much to, that he's withstood all the consequences in doing. He's got something that's in there. Ask him, what are you getting out of it? If it's so good, maybe I'll try it. You know? What is it doing for you? And the addict says, most often, it turns off the damn tapes. The tapes in his head. Also in the voice of the person who first said those things. The tapes of the parent. In their voices. That's what he hears. When he finds something that turns off those tapes. Wow. That's magic. If you want to know about the life experiences of your addict client, say, "Tell me about the tapes in your head." You'll know what you're doing. And you'll learn a great deal about his life experiences in this particular area. If you find something, an activity or a substance that does these things, then it then facilitates leaving the reality, even turning off the parts of the reality that are still in your head, so that now you can have this altered sense of consciousness. Suddenly, Shazam, the door opens to the altered state. Once these things happen. And all of these things are dissociative reactions. And yet they're a part of every form of addictive behavior. Check it out. Check it out. To get a little more detail, one boring reality testing, how does that happen? Well, attention is diverted from this chronic arousal state mentioned, the physiological state I mentioned. It's diverted by the physiological effects of the ingested substance. Or the concentrated attention, and this is what happens with gambling. The concentrated attention in sex and work, it's not exclusive. When you concentrate so much on one thing, how many of you are listening to me at this moment? I'm pretty sure. But as you listen to me, you don't hear the rattling of papers in the back of the room. You don't hear the person blowing their nose over there. Those things are kind of blurred out. Now they're happening. And you can attend to them if you focused on them, but you're not. You're focused on me. When you focus on me, when you concentrate, when you read a book, when you study for an exam, anything, that provides a form of dissociation through concentration. We call it psychological absorption. All it means is, I'm focusing, I'm paying attention to this thing, and the other things are of less importance in my area of attention. When we ask gamblers, there's some cute stories. The guy drops dead at the craps table, at the huge fire in the casino, and these people are still playing the machines or whatever. He said, well, didn't you have the fire engines? Didn't you know that Sam, your friend, dropped dead while you were playing craps? Well, I hadn't noticed. And they hadn't noticed. They were so focused on what they were doing. You ask a person in the midst of approaching orgasm, you know, how does your elbow still itch? And they're likely to say, what elbow? That's psychological absorption. And interestingly enough, when you later ask persons about their experience, let's say gambling and so on, in the casino, there'll be lacunae, there'll be missing parts of their recollection that they report. And that's a form of blackout, memory blackout. Now that's a big word too. But all we mean is they weren't attending to a lot of those things. Now you can reestablish it by saying, well, now think of the alarm of the fire engines. Just think about that a minute. Yeah, how many fire engines were there? Well, I think there were maybe 2. You can reestablish that, but it isn't in the focus of the consciousness. Those are blurred out. This self-criticalness in the sport mood, when they gamble, when they use their alcohol, when they're involved in sex or drugs or whatever else, how many? 5. Attention is diverted from the effects of this early childhood trauma, assuming it exists. You got to check it out. We used to believe when I was trained in analytic procedures that certain things are there. The theory says they're there, and if the patient doesn't report it, he's resisting, and you just keep plugging away, and pretty soon he'll report it, if he's a good patient. Some bad patients don't report. But we have to go beyond theory. We have to get some facts. And so we use this test, this assessment instrument, to find out if indeed this patient, this client, has indeed been exposed to those kinds of abuse. And once we find out, once we check it out, then we can find out further what's happening with this kid. Now, this business of reducing the tapes in the head allows the client to stop the preoccupation with the negative image and begin to enter this lovely state of consciousness where he runs the world. And in his world, he's no longer one out. He's one up. He's creating this world. Things are good. I'm powerful. I'm sexy. I'm smart. I'm all of these great things. I'm a big shot. And what's more, he'll try to find protective covering. All addicts are camouflage experts. They kind of run the behavior in situations where they're not to be identified easily. If they're an alcoholic, they become a bonbon, and they go from the better places. They're always found in the best bars, in the best hotels, drinking. Or if they're a food addict, they go from restaurant to restaurant and praise the food and ingest. And so they lose themselves in these conducive environments. A casino, that's a great place for a compulsive gambler to go. Everybody's doing it. A restaurant for a food addict. A party for a sex addict, and so on and so forth. They look, and sometimes they'll even take their spouses with them. as part of the camouflage. This is social. It's just she and me. We do it together. All to keep the behavior going. The addict is in this second stage, the stage of resistance to giving up and reducing what he's doing. The third thing that happens is this altered state of consciousness. I told you that there's not only an altered state of consciousness, there's frequently an altered state of identity. When you run your daydreams, when you run your reveries, you're the star. You're the star of the play. You're it. Sometimes you don't want to be it. Sometimes you just want to get the hell out. Completely. And when you do it, remember the Tennessee Williams play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof? Remember the young man, the athlete who breaks his leg, he's no longer able to compete, and he becomes an excessive drinker and alcoholic. And someone asks him in the play, why do you keep drinking? And he says, I keep drinking until I get that click in my head. When I get that click, I know I'm bad. And what does the click do for him? The click turns off those feelings, those tapes in his head. You go to a casino and you see before you at the machines what has been described as a sea of gray. Older people at the machines, playing. You go to them, you put your hand in front of their eyes, they don't even notice. Why? Because they're mesmerized. They are playing those machines because the machines in the source of playing take their minds off everything. They no longer feel the pain in their rheumatic knees. They no longer feel the pain that the kids haven't called in 3 months. They no longer feel the pain that they're retired now. They used to be the boss, and now they go home and take out the garbage. Who are they? And that pain is just blurred out. So fantasy gives you two options. To be somebody, or to just turn the world off. And you can do it. You have this tremendous tool called addiction. That's amazing. And addicts have found it out, and once discovered, they're not about to easily give it up.